now let's begin with this lecture dedicated to sustainable community and well-being in Latin America. Thank you. Okay. The first thing to reflect is what is Latin America. Now, when I was speaking about Latin America, I need to tell you that including the Caribbean zone, yes? For me, Latin America is all, yes? Well, to talk about sustainable community well-being in Latin America, we need to speak that is part of the global south. You know, this concept that dates from the 70s and refer to Latin America, to Africa, some parts of Asia, and Oceania. And a key characteristic of global south is the persistent inequalities and also poverty. But at the same time, it exhibits similar political, cultural, or religious elements and has developed a significant set of agreements between our countries. Thank you. We will speak about different concepts so we can understand all the proposal, yes? So first of all, speak about community. For me, community is considered in a totality, which is meaningful to the people that form part of it. And in this sense, community is much more than a geographic concertation, much more than a space. It is a concept that implies the inclusion of diversities and they are being allowed to share within it. It is related to social support, intersubjectivity, participation, consensus, common beliefs, and a joint effort which aims at the major objective as intense and extends relationships between their members. The 21st century present new models of community, not only the traditional, yes? So today the idea of community is centered on the belonging to a geographical space, moved to be conceptualized in terms of the relationships between the people. The new realities that people are experiencing lead them to live everyday life more from an individual than a collective strategy. This impacts their sense of belonging to the community and directly affects their quality of life and their well-being. Likewise, the ways in which people participate in community spaces have also changed. Current social transformations have affected the traditional and distinctive characteristic of the concept of community, which was based on people sharing a geographical space of residence and with which they identify and in which they maintain face-to-face relationships with other members of the community. The arrival of the digital age and the construction of virtual communities have transformed the landscape. And so when we refer to a specific spatial location, we are not only referring to a neighborhood, but rather we now include the cyberspace. If we speak about community as a place, because I know that today we have a group of geographers, so I'll be very quiet about what I will tell about it. The important thing is to speak about livability. What is livability? Yes, it's about human requirement for social amenity, health, and well-being, and it is about human environment, so it can never be separated from the natural environment. When analyzing livability, two dimensions must be considered. For example, livelihood, this is to say housing, employment, access to services, for example, and ecological sustainability, green spaces, breathable air, and it is also necessary to consider political ecology, sustainability, and also justice. The other important element is sense of place. That is the meaning and attachments that community residents have towards their community, saying that it is potentially useful indicator of sustainability. It's defined as an overarching impression encompassing the general ways in which people feel about places, sense these places and assign concepts and values to it. So a sense of place is not simply about having experienced the place. One has to be able to transmit this experience to others. Mm-hmm. And if we continue focuses, what about community well-being? That is a specific type of well-being. Community well-being is the combination of social, economic, environmental, cultural, and political conditions identified by individuals and their communities as essential for them to thrive and fulfill their potential. The elements that people value in community life do not always turn out to be the same, for example, in the city that in the rural context. The definition of community well-being is not one-dimensional. Furthermore, it is important to recognize the multidimensional nature of the concept and the relevant role of the social-cultural context. But community well-being also varies across cultures, so taking this into consideration, it is not possible to assume the universality of community well-being. The study of community well-being constitutes a theoretical possibility to recognize people potentiality besides including a socio-political analysis of the context, which establishes social and political reality based on the respect on human rights. But the most important thing to analyze is people in the community. And I want to share with you these dimensions when we are studying community daily life. For example, the sense of community and belonging, interpersonal relationships among community members, friendships, not always, but in some cases friendship, community support, solidarity among community members, and very important in the life of the community, intergenerational solidarity, and participation of community members in community organizations. The notion of belonging to a community that not only contains a feeling of rootedness, yes, but it also implies a feeling of responsibility and loyalty. Therefore, it is recognized that the members of the community have traits that identify them and distinguish them from those who are not part of this community. Interpersonal relationships in the community are essential because they provide support and sustenance, a key aspects of people's well-being. The changes that have occurred at the social and international level since the beginning of the 21st century have also generated simultaneous changes in social relations. Social relationships arise from certain contexts, and obviously community is one of them. The world in which we live every day, yes, is intersubjective, since we live in it in relations to others. And that intersubjectivity and social relations are expressed in the world of everyday life, which is provided with multiple meanings attributed by the persons. The effect of social relationships and the relations people have with the environment is mediated by the way in which each person interprets their context and their situation. The specificity of the term community lies in the intersubjectivity and in the fact of sharing. And the situation implies the same field of experience, a shared understanding of that experience, and values common to all. Community is not a subjectivity that arises from some of previously constituted individual subjectivity, not the summary, yes? It is generated from being with others, because the community presupposes an irreducible heterogeneity of the subjects that make it up and that are formed within it. And here I will return to one element that I have already worked on my book dedicated to quality of life in communities of Latin countries, in which I pointed out the importance of considering the conversations between community members, since conversation is the primary form of communication between people that allows them to get to know each other. In everyday conversations, people use what is called common or mother language, learned during childhood, in which it is assumed that the meaning of the words used is shared with those who listen. But in the case of a community, its members speak in a language that they understand that others who are not members might not necessarily understand. In summary, to understand what happens in a community, it is necessary to identify and interpret the social relationships that are woven between its members. First, by listening to their conversations in the context in which these conversations occur. The other important thing that is very important, very characteristic of Latin America, is friendship. Yes? And we find the first precedent of the concept of friendship, well, a lot of centuries ago. We must remember Aristotle and the famous book Nicomachean Ethics, in which the author defines friendship as a virtue and considers that friendship exists in the community and is even defined as a community, seeing what each of its members choose to experience is what they wish to share with their friends. And while we can observe some similarities in the concept of friendship in different societies, there are also cultural differences in the meaning and function of friendship in relation with each society. The other element to consider is the community support. That is based on social interaction among its members, and that when we can recognize a previous concept, social support. Social support is the perception or experience that one is loved and cared of by others, yes? Esteem and value, and part of social network on mutual assistance and obligations. From the 80s, different types of social support were identified, for example, emotional support, informational support, instrumental support, and so on. And it is also possible to differentiate between received support and perceived support. Received support, for example, is the number of supportive behaviors received by an individual, and perceived support, the satisfaction with the support as well as the availability to each person. The other concept is solidarity, that has been considered as the cohesion and integration of a group, and is also related with help, generosity, collaboration, gratitude, concern for others, integral realization, and development. It also can be considered at the micro level or macro level. Solidarity at the macro level is closely linked to community, being a key element for community development. Solidarity in terms of community also considers the construction of the common good. In other words, it's an element of improvement of people's quality of life and people's well-being. It demands more direct forms of democratic participation, entailing a different concept of political responsibility for the local population in decision-making and participation. In this context, solidarity cannot be limited to interaction between individuals. It also considers the needs of the ecosystem upon which society depends for its own survival. Well, let's speak a little about the participation of community members in the neighborhood organization, the communities, and voluntary organizations. Community members can participate in various types of community organization, for example, neighborhood, religious, NGO, government, and others, that aim to provide a service by collaborating to assist or resolve some kind of problem. Voluntary community organizations are characterized by having a geographic base, being driven by volunteers, focusing on problem solving, and also providing a sense of belonging. Participation in community organization has always been a characteristic of communities in Latin American countries. So let's go to the final part. It is about the proposal of building sustainable community well-being in Latin American countries. We need first to explain and to remember what is this word, sustainability, because sustainability is a concept that has different meanings depending on the ideas and objectives of those who use the concept, yes? And about which a consensus really has not yet been reached. During the last 30 years of the 20th century, the debate on sustainability focused on the need to ensure a healthier natural environment for future generations. But at the end of the 20th, the authors began to recognize that in addition to environmental protection, the objective had to be improving people's quality of life and well-being. And Anand Sen, the Nobel Prize Sen, Amartya Sen, stated that sustainability is a matter of distributional equity in a broad sense. That is, of sharing the capability for well-being between present people and future people in a way which neither the present generation nor the future generation can readily reject. And now we need to speak about the green agenda, the brown agenda, speaking about sustainability. The green agenda focuses most of environmental protection, biodiversity, and ozone layer protection. It's more related with the situation of the global north. But in the global south, we have the brown agenda, which aims to alleviate poverty, provide infrastructure, development, access to health, and education. Between these two positions emerged the so-called just sustainability paradigm, a discursive flexible framework that linked the green and the brown agenda, trying to make a relation between the two. This paradigm have 4 areas of concern: quality of life, present and future generations, justice and equity, and living within ecosystems limits. So we are trying to propose this diagram. Within the center is sustainable community well-being, and the elements are sustainable community needs, community participation, the key role of the community members, community resilience, inclusive well-being, and sustainable policies. We need all these things. I know it's too much, but we'll try to imagine if we can. Yes? Okay. First, sustainable community needs. Well, I think all of you remember the definition of Maslow, yes, about needs. But I will propose another one. A Latin American author, a Chilean author. I know there are people from Chile here. That was called Manfred Max Neef, an economist that presented the human scale development proposal based on the concept of fundamental human needs. I believe that these proposals is aligned with sustainable communities, particularly in Latin America and also in the global south. In the 90s, I visited Chile and I met Max Neef's team, and from that moment I began to teach this theoretical proposal to my student of community social work. This perspective particularly interests me because the discourses surrounding needs differ depending if we ask people who experiencing those needs from the view of the professional teams or policymakers who analyze these needs. Yes. In this regard, I recall my university study in social work in the 80s, where I learned the difference between the felt needs from that are the needs of the populations and the needs identified by the professionals. The concept of felt needs is based on the knowledge and other resources available to people and their cultural practices. Also, Sen considers the relevance of the differences in how people satisfy their needs, focusing on the fact that they may require different resources to achieve the same freedoms. So Max Neef in the 80s proposed the human scale development approach, which is based on the idea of satisfying fundamental needs, self-reliance, the organic integration of human beings with the nature and technology, the global with the local, the personal with the social, and planning with autonomy for civil society and the state. The author supports his proposal considering the protagonism of people as subjects of development, not as objects of development, respecting their autonomy and diversity. In this sense, the best development process will be the one that most improves people's quality of life, depending on their ability to adequately satisfy their fundamental human needs. But by needs, Max Neef understands not only the lack of something. He also considered the potential that this implies insofar as needs engage, motivate, and mobilize people. Furthermore, the author clarifies that needs are social or universal in nature, and that what changes are the satisfiers that respond to those needs. And he defines satisfiers as cultural constructs generated by each society in each historical period. Well, the other element we need is community participation. The practice of community participation implies a sense of belonging and at the same time of action. Since for the community to participate authentically, it is essential to determine its degree of autonomy, to intervene in the process and introduce changes to the original design. In other words, the members of the community must participate on equal terms with those responsible for the project, whether they are agents of the central or local government. In this sense, it is important to point out that simply consulting citizens about pre-established programs cannot be considered real participation. Yes? There are different types of community participation, but for it to be effective, it requires the development of organized collective action that leads to a collective decision. From my point of view, the essential concept of participation lies in joint decision-making, which implies distribution of power rather than simply acting together. Let's speak a little about the key role of community members. To discuss the key role of community members, it is necessary to introduce the concept of protagonism, which refers to the central figure on the social and political stage, based on the idea of the popular protagonism of the 60s in Latin America. The concept of protagonism has various meanings, depending on the political, social, and ideological conception of the social group that uses it. Protagonism is the result of a social construct that is continually enriched by the experiences of social actors and their communities, which opens the possibility of a rearticulation of the political, social, and economic structures and the social and human relationships. The members of the communities are in principle social actors, protagonists and agents of their own lives in the communities they inhabit, and therefore their key role is indisputable. Community implies the existence of social cohabitation, which is constructed by society as a foundation of democracy, and in this sense, politics should also take care of people's subjective experiences. The other important things to consider is community resilience, that is the ability of communities to anticipate and adapt to risk and to recover without compromising their long-term prospect, including the ability to develop capabilities, behaviors, and actions to overcome adversity. In this regard, the ability of a group to withstand, accommodate, and recover from adversity engages community well-being as a driver that contributes to building urban resilience with the goal of building a sustainable community. The other thing is inclusive well-being, and when we are speaking about inclusive well-being, we are first of all respecting diversities, and we can consider inclusive well-being in terms of physical, gender, ages, politics, ethnic, and religious, yes? Sustainable inclusive well-being is multidimensional. It's for the people and the planet and for today and tomorrow, and it considers resilience, and has the aim of overcoming inequalities and promotes the generation of sustainable policies to achieve justice. But when we are working in the community, most of us, or all of us, ask the same question. The question refers to how a person feels about their life in the community they live in. How satisfied are you with the community? Satisfaction with the particular aspect of life represents a report on how each person views the situation about which they are being questioned. Therefore, asking someone about their level of satisfaction with life in their community constitutes a report of their level of satisfaction with community life. Edward Dinner, wants to fully understand the level of satisfaction a person has in each dimension of their life. it is necessary to first ask them how important it is to him or her, and how much they enjoy it and how much they would like to change it. When we are analyzing satisfaction with life in the community, we can have a lot of indicators about environment, safety on the street, access to social services, interaction among neighbors, infrastructures and facility, public transportation, the possibility of working and enjoying leisure time in the communities, the possibility of meeting in public spaces with other community members to exchange ideas and discuss common problems and concerns. Well, and the last one, the last element is perhaps the more difficult, the construction of sustainable public policies, yes? Public policies can be defined in a broad sense as the responses of the government to the social problems of people. But the conception of public policies has seen an evolution in the past few years from the traditional perspective to the inclusion of involvement of other actors apart from the government in the definition of the problem and also in the formulation of alternatives to resolve these problems. So to generate sustainable public policies, transformative governance is required, with an holistic decision-making process that leverages the capabilities of multiple actors and integrates the diversity of their perspectives. Transformations are built through networks, alliances and coalitions that connect diverse actors and should focus on how local knowledge and practices connect with broader transformative change. The alliances must be rooted in the community and connected with its members so that they can facilitate the generation of the transformation necessary to create new policies, and this new perspective requires new institutional mechanisms from the state that combine participation with heterogeneity. One of the elements to consider when generating sustainable policy for building sustainable communities is the social dialogue. As dialogue is the fundamental basis for human communication, which is expressed in the conversations between people. Freire, the famous Brazilian pedagogist, Paulo Freire, already alerts that dialogue requires humility, so that the relationships are horizontal between those who dialogue. And it is also requires the hope that arises from the possibility that those who dialogue can seek new alternatives based on perceiving reality as a process in flux. Only a little reflection about research methods. Measurement is an important function in the study of social reality. But before deciding what to measure and with which indicators do the measurement, it is also necessary to understand the meaning that people attribute to the situation they experience in their daily lives. So policymakers also need not only quantitative indicators, they need quantitative method information to take the decision. And I want to share with you this proposal of analyzing, speaking about sustainable community well-being and considering inclusive well-being. 3 dimensions: people, key role, places, and sustainable policies. In the first dimension, the indicators are belongingness, contribution to common good, mutual trust, solidarity, particularly intergenerational solidarity, caring, neighbors' relationships, members' participation of community organizations, and community resilience. In the case of places, environment, infrastructures and facilities, safety on the streets, public transportations, possibility to have a job, public spaces, leisure time. And finally, considering sustainable policies, we need social dialogue, transformative policies, and access, real access to social services. So, conclusion and the first step to a path to go. Latin America is a region characterized by persistent economical, social, and political inequality, but at the same time is recognized for the importance of social relationships, friendships, and solidarity among its members, which over the years have become a way of coping with adversity through social support, reflected in their levels of well-being and happiness. The concept of community is fundamental in Latin America, and recent new models of community have emerged, as well as the way people participate in community spaces. In Latin America, well-being transcends the idea of material wealth and encompasses social, emotional, and relational dimensions, crucial for holistic and sustainable human development. Community well-being is the combination of social, economic, environmental, cultural, and political conditions that communities identify as essential for meeting their human needs and developing their potentiality. Any definition of community well-being must be contextualized within communities. A transformative idea of public policy is critical for the achievement of sustainability. Policymakers require information from statistical indicators, but also information from qualitative research methods that place people at the center of their study. The construction of sustainable community well-being is centered on the leading role of community members. Sustainable community well-being needs to be inclusive. In Latin America and in the rest of the Global South, the construction of sustainable communities must uphold the idea of overcoming inequalities and poverty, respecting diversity and human rights to achieve justice. Summarizing, achieving sustainability requires promoting human security that supports a stable life for all and demonstrates each person's capacity to be a key actor in the process on changing global dynamics. I present my next book, is not published yet, will be published at the end of the year, Sustainable Communities in the Global South, Integrating Wellbeing, Resilience, and Capabilities, that will be part of the series Sustainable Development Goals series. Some of the co-authors are today with me. Okay, thank you very much for all. Yes.